Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Abhatreshu Tam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtat Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Namo Pankajanaphaya, Namo Pankajamaline, Namo Pankajanetraya, Namaste Pankajang. So today we are reading from Canto 2, Chapter 7, which is the scheduled incarnations with specific functions. We're reading text 5. Taptam tapo vidaloka shishrikshayame Adau sanat sva tapasa sachatu sanobhut prakkalpa samplava vinashtam ihatma tattvam samyak jagada punayo yad achakshatatman. Word for word. Taptam, having undergone austerities. Tapa, penance. Vividha loka, different planetary systems. Shishrikshaya, desiring to create. Me, of mine. Adav, at first. Sanat, from the personality of Godhead. Swatapasaha, by dint of my own penances. Saha, he, the Lord. Chatu Sanaha, the 4 bachelors named Sanat Kumara, Sanaka, Sanandana, and Sanatan. Abhut, Abhut appeared. Prak, previous. Kalpa, creation. Samplava, inundation. Vinashtam, devastated. Iha, in this material world. Atma, the spirit. Tattvam, truth. Samyak, incomplete. Jagada, became manifested. Munaya, sages. Yat, that which. Achakshata, saw clearly. Atman, the spirit. Translation and purport. Divine Srila Prabhupada. Jai. To create different planetary systems, I had to undergo austerities and penance. And the Lord, thus being pleased with me, incarnated in 4 sanas, Sanaka, Sanat Kumara, Sanandana, and Sanatan. In the previous creation, the spiritual truth was devastated, but the 4 sanas explained it so nicely that the truth at once became clearly perceived by the sages. Purport. The Vishnu Sahasranam prayers mention the Lord's name as Sanat and Sanatana Tama. The Lord and the living entities are both qualitatively Sanatan, or eternal. But the Lord is Sanatana Tama, or the eternal in this superlative. The living entities are positively Sanatana, but not superlative, because the living entities are apt to fall to the atmosphere of non-eternity. Therefore, the living entities are quantitatively different from the superlative Sanatana, the Lord. The word Son is also used in the sense of charity. Therefore, when everything is given up in charity unto the Lord reciprocates by giving himself unto the devotee. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4.8. Ye yathamam prapatyanti. Brahmaji wanted to create the whole cosmic situation as it was in the previous millennium. And because in the last devastation, knowledge of the absolute truth was altogether erased from the universe, he desired that the same knowledge again be renovated. Otherwise, there would be no meaning in the creation. Because transcendental knowledge is a prime necessity, the ever-conditioned souls are given a chance for liberation in every millennium of creation. The mission of Brahmaji was fulfilled by the grace of the Lord. four sanas, namely Sanaka, Sanat Kumar, Sanandana, and Sanatan, appeared as his four sons. These four sanas were incarnations of the knowledge of the Supreme Lord, and as such, they explained transcendental knowledge so explicitly that all the sages could at once assimilate this knowledge without the least difficulty. By following in the footsteps of the four Kumaras, one can at once see the Supreme Personality of Godhead within oneself. Prayer invoking the prayers of the Parampara. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhuta Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yudapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Tam Sajeev Sadhutam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Dev Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Tamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sati Mami Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvacha Patitanam Papa Krishna Pito Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Srivasa Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Rama. Welcome, dear devotees, to this morning's Bhagavad discussion. I've been given another opportunity to present and glorify the Amala Purana and the Supreme Lord's incarnations. I'm completely unqualified, but I will try a little with my capacity for my purification. So I ardently seek the blessings of Guru Maharaj and the assembled devotees. Speak something, somebody. So in the last chapter, Brahma answered Narada's very specific questions about who is the ultimate creator. Is it not you? Is it not Brahma himself? Who are you meditating upon? And Brahma had explained that it's not him, but Krishna is the ultimate source and creator. Having explained all of that, he then volunteers to tell Narada in a way about the incarnations of the Lord. So he basically explains that how the Lord, who has provided the blueprint as well as the ingredients for this universe and the intelligence to Brahma, so that Brahma can be an instrument to create. After once he creates this universe, the Lord actually appears within that same creation for the benefit of the entities. And it also says in the last verse of chapter 6 that hearing the pastimes of the incarnations cleans the ears and the hearts. In this chapter 7, Brahma from his heart is speaking about the various incarnations of the Lord and the specific functions that they had come to execute. The Kumaras are known as the firstborn of Lord Brahma. They were born from his mind, so they're called Manasputra. And we've already read about them a little bit, Canto 1, Chapter 3. And in various other cantos across the Bhagavatam, the Sanat Kumars are mentioned multiple times. So in this verse, this particular verse, as we read in the translation, Brahma had the responsibility to create different planetary systems. So he underwent austerities and penance. So that's kind of a instruction to us that before starting anything, you have to pray and you have to seek the blessings of the Lord. and depend on the Lord. The Lord was pleased with that penance, and he incarnated the 4 Kumaras. So from Brahmaji's perspective, he created the 4 Kumaras, Sanaka, Sanat Kumar, Sanandana, Sanatana, from his mind, because Brahmaji had to create and populate the universe. So after generating the Kumaras, Brahma naturally told them that, my dear sons, now go forth and generate progeny. But we learned that the Kumaras were not ready to do that. They were great sages, of course, incarnations of the Lord, and they were highly elevated. And they were not willing. They detested the idea of getting entangled in materialistic activities. They wanted to stay away from Maya, any kind of lust, vasana, anything that, everything that Maya pulls one into after one is born. And in fact, they wanted to stay on as 5-year-olds, in a 5-year-old form. So why is that? That's the reason for that is because at that age, children generally look at women as their mother. And so the innocence kind of continues. So the chance of entanglement is basically minimized. So Prabhupada, throughout his books, he has abundantly emphasized the importance of celibacy, right? Self-control in order to achieve perfection, like the Kumaras. But of course, Brahmaji's objectives were not met by that, and he became very angry because his sons were disobedient, firstborns. And it says in some of the later chapters, cantos, that he tried not to show it. In fact, in Canto 3, it talks about this. He tried not to show that anger, but his anger came out from his eyebrows, came out as Rudra. So anyway, after that, Brahma goes on, and he creates many other children who actually helped him with the mission of procreation and populating the world. And they are, again, very, very elevated personalities like Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulasya, Pulaha, Daksha, Narada. Now, of course, so all of them created progenies except Narada Muni, Brahma is talking to right now, and of course, the Kumaras. So, again, coming back to the translation and the verse, so it says that in the previous creation, spiritual truth was devastated. But the 4 sanas explained it so nicely that the truth at once became clearly perceived by the. So the Kumaras were Shaktiavesh avatars of the Lord. So what is a Shaktiavesh avatar? It is in Madhya, Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya, chapter 20 says that an incarnation who represents a particular opulence of the Supreme Lord is a Shaktiavesh avatar. And Lord Chaitanya has said that there are innumerable incarnations like that. And specifically verse 371 of chapter 20, Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya says that the power of knowledge was invested in the 4 Kumaras. And the power of devotional service, so these are, examples of how there are many, many incarnations with that are Shaktiavesh avatars. So the power of knowledge was invested in the 4 Kumaras. The power of devotional service was invested in Narada. The power of creation was invested in Lord Brahma. So Brahma, we know, is a Guna avatar as well. So there are some personalities who fall in multiple categories. And the power to carry innumerable planets was invested in Lord Ananta. Okay. So coming now to the purport, it says that the Vishnu Sahasranam prayers mention the Lord's name as Sanat and Sanatana, Sanatana Tama. So the Lord and the living entities are both qualitatively Sanatana or equal. And we hear that a lot. But here it says that the Lord is Sanatana Tama, or the eternal in the superlative degree. Why? Because living entities, of course, we know are liable to fall down. So qualitatively, the Lord, while the living entities are Sanatana, but the Lord is at the highest level. So Sanatana Tama is, we hear of a great, greater, greatest. So comparative superlative. So the Lord is a superlative, right? He's the greatest. He's Sanatana Tama. And in the next paragraph, Prabhupada very nicely, very, expertly inserts that beautiful message of reciprocation of the Lord. So he says that the word son is also used in the sense of charity. Therefore, when everything is given up in charity unto the Lord reciprocates by giving himself unto the devotee. And this is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4:11. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Of course, if you think about it, what is it that we can give in charity to the Lord in any case, right? After all, everything that we have is the Lord's. Everything belongs to Krishna. Yet the Lord is so compassionate that he looks for the best in all of our actions. And he always reciprocates. It's like the child, when a father brings a bag of cookies, say, for the child, and the child gives, one or two to the father. And the father becomes so overjoyed because in that, that action of the child giving him a cookie, the father reads into that tremendous love for him, thoughtfulness of the child, and sees all good qualities, right? And picks him up and hugs him. And as a result, is happy to give the child even more, whatever the child needs or whatever the child asks for. So that's how the Lord is, that's how compassionate. So now Prabhupada comes to the point about spiritual truth has been devastated in the previous millennium. So we know that there is, many kinds of annihilations that happen various times. There's partial annihilation, total annihilation, especially at the end of every day of Brahma, which consists of 1,000 yuga cycles. Devastation happens, and then of course at the end of his life. So in this verse in particular, it talks about how Brahmaji had to restore knowledge like it was in the previous millennium. Because without knowledge of the absolute truth, Srila Prabhupada says, there is no meaning in creation. So let's think a little bit about why is that. The reason is material creation has a very specific objective. And we hear about that. It is the objective is to give an opportunity to the jiva to facilitate realization, right, of the self, of God, and of our relationship with the Lord. So Krishna says in chapter 5, Bhagavad Gita, Mamaivam Sru Jiva Loke Jiva Sanatan. So we are parts and parcels, we are anshas of the Lord, and he wants us with him. And he has created this material universe, or kind of sanctioned or commissioned this material universe as a reformation facility, also called a prison house, right? Because we are rebellious souls, and we have all decided to come away from the freedom that we actually had in the spiritual world. We decided to come away into this prison house where we are bound by the gunas, given by Maya Devi. So it is very important that that there is bona fide knowledge is available to us, so we can correct our ways. It's like the manual, right, of life, of how to understand who we are. How can we return back to our original position with with the Lord. That's why it was so important for Brahmaji to restore the original knowledge from the prior millennium. Now, we also learn that when the environment is not right in this universe, like this situation where the knowledge to guide the jivas back was lost, the Lord, out of his compassion, himself comes, takes, comes to this world. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharat. So wherever there is a decline of religious practice, tells Arjuna, and there's a prominent rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. And that's why he appears as the Sanat Kumaras. So we also know that just as we belong to the Brahma Madhava Gauriya Sampradaya, there is also a Vaishnava Sampradaya called the Kumara Sampradaya. And we know that just as, we know that Brahma, the Lord has given knowledge directly into his heart. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavai Muhayan. So how did the Kumaras get that same knowledge? You can see that a little bit. There are a few references as to how the Kumaras got that knowledge. So in Canto 3, chapter 12, it talks about, this is verse 4, that although Brahma created the principles of nations as a matter of necessity for those living entities who were destined to ignorance by the will of the Lord, he was not satisfied in performing such a thankless task. He created nations, but he was not happy. So he therefore created 4 principles of knowledge: Sankhya, or empirical philosophy, for the analytical study of material conditions; Yoga, or mysticism, for liberation of the pure soul from the material bondage; Vairagya, which is the acceptance of complete detachment from material enjoyment in life, to elevate oneself to the highest spiritual understanding; and Tapas, or various kinds of voluntary austerities performed for spiritual perfection. And when Brahma created the 4 great sages, he entrusted to them these 4 principles of spiritual advancement. And with that, they inaugurated their own spiritual sampradaya, the Kumara Sampradaya. Of course, and that became the Nimbarka Sampradaya later. Now, Prabhupada also says that all of these great sages became great devotees, because without devotional service to the personality of Godhead, one cannot achieve success in any activity spiritual. So that's how the Now maybe we can talk a little bit about how they became devotees of the Lord. Because Kumaras were originally Gyanis. They were great Gyanis, great mystics they could travel everywhere like Narada Muni. So we hear of the story of how they came to Vaikuntha and Jai Vijay stopped them. And then that whole incident about, cursing, how they cursed Jai Vijay, which led to them becoming the 2 most terrible, bhayankar demons, right, in all the yugas, Satya, Treta, Dwapar, Kali. Now, after that incident, Vishnu actually comes out from his abode, and this again, Canto 3, chapter 15 talks about that. So all that has happened. Kumaras have cursed Vishnu, and then when he appears in front of them, how astonished and how they are, with him, seeing him as a personality, because they were actually impersonal earlier. So here it talks about the Lord's countenance was distinguished by cheeks that enhanced the beauty of his alligator-shaped pendants, which outshone lightning. His nose was prominent. His head was covered with a gem-studded crown. A charming necklace hung between his stout arms, and his neck was adorned with a gem known as by the name of Kaustava. And talks about the exquisite beauty of Narayana, being many times magnified by the intelligence of his devotees. was so attractive that it defeated the pride of the goddess of fortune, most beautiful, and, and so on. So that the Lord himself is worshipable by me. Maitreya Muni is talking about this, by Lord Shiva, all of you. The sages regarded him with unsated eyes and joyously bowed their heads at his lotus feet. And then, of course, text 43 is what we know popularly as, how they really changed. The breeze carrying the aroma of tulsi leaves from the toes of the lotus feet, the personality of God, entered the nostrils of those sages. They experienced a change both in body and in mind, even though they were attached to the personal Brahman understanding. And the next verse says that the Lord's beautiful face appeared to them like the inside of a blue lotus, and the Lord's smile appeared to be a blossoming jasmine flower. After seeing the face of the Lord, the sages were completely satisfied, and when they wanted to see him further, they looked upon the nails of his lotus feet, which resembled rubies. Thus, they viewed the Lord's transcendental body again and again. So they finally achieved meditation on the Lord's personal nature. So became they converted from that impersonalism to bhakti. Some more interesting facts about the Kumaras is how the Sampradaya came down in disciplic succession, and this some very interesting topics about that is there in chapter 8 of Canto 3, where it talks about how the Bhagavat Puran was spoken to the sages by the personality of Godhead himself. It wasn't just that, not through Brahma, and not just that Brahma was given that knowledge directly, but the Kumaras were as well. And this was for the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure. Text 2. So in text 3, so this I'll summarize a bit, we are running out of time, that Sanat Kumaras were inquisitive to know about Vasudeva. And so they came to Lord Sankarshana, who's seated at the bottom of the universe. And Lord Sankarshana was meditating upon his Supreme Lord, esteemed as Lord Vasudeva. But he opened his eyes. The Sanat Kumars came. He began to speak. And the interesting thing here is that the sages actually came from the highest planet. Their residences in the higher planets, the Tapalokas and Vaikuntha, in fact, also travel all over. And how did they come down to the lower region? It says through the waters of the Ganges. And therefore, the hair on their heads was wet. So the Ganges actually serve as water highways for these elevated sages and elevated personalities. So they worshiped the Lord, and then they heard about the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, glorified in their rhythmic accents, etc. At that time, Lord Sankarshana, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the stones of his head. Just talking about Srimad Bhagavatam. So he spoke about the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this knowledge then, Sanat Kumaras spoke to, here it talks about Sankhayana Muni, who then explained, so they spoke it as they had learned it from Sankarshana. And Sankhayana Muni, as he was describing, so when he was describing the glories of the Lord in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam, Parashar Muni and Brahaspati also heard. That's how it kind of came down in the disciplic succession. So we keep hearing about that, right? Disciplic succession, the four sampradayas. So this is about how the Kumara Sampradaya proceeded. So that's kind of where the verse ends, which is the four Sana has explained it so nicely that the truth at once became clearly perceived by the sages. So a few other quick things. Uddhava Gita, in Uddhava Gita, the Lord tells Uddhava that I am Narayana amongst the sages and Sanat Kumara among brahmacharis. And the Sanat Kumars, as we know, are Mahajans. They are of very high stature. In fact, in Canto 4, Lord Vishnu told Maharaj Prithu, Maharaj Prithu himself is an avatar, that if you become a good king, you will be able to see liberated souls like the Kumaras. So it's clear that seeing the Kumaras and associating with them is great fortune. Just as for us, it is a great fortune to have association of Srila Prabhupada, for example, his books and our sannyasis. And really, we should never miss the opportunity, because when great souls speak to us, that knowledge, that's when transformation happens. And the knowledge that is there, I mean, there is abundant knowledge that's available, even from the Vedas. But if that knowledge is used to make our lives comfortable in this temporary world, it's a complete waste. And even hankering for more and more gyan is just as bad. I was listening to some of the lectures. It's just as bad as hankering for material possessions. So as human beings, it is our responsibility to follow in the footsteps of the pure devotees, personalities like Kumaras, so that we can develop Krishna prema, lolium for Krishna, his abode. Athata Brahma Jigyasa, that is the important part. So I'll end here, 4 minutes over. Thank you very much, and sorry if I misspoke anything, or please add or correct. I really don't have much philosophy, so I'm just grateful I've had the opportunity. Please free to add, share something. Not end here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Panchaka Pass